arrogance masquerades as authority. Inside the gleaming auditorium of Carnegie Metropolitan, renowned conductor Maestro Victor Steinberg surveyed the crowd of music students and donors. His eyes settled on a quiet Latina woman sitting in the back row, dressed in simple street clothes among the formally attired audience. A nobody. Perfect, he gestured dismissively in her direction, his voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps our visitor would like to demonstrate how real musicians perform? The audience chuckled nervously as he motioned toward the grand piano. What Steinberg didn't realize was that this wasn't just any civilian music lover, she was Isabella Reyes, once the world's most celebrated concert pianist before she vanished from the spotlight 5 years ago. The humiliation he orchestrated was about to shatter his carefully constructed reputation. When she approached that piano, the empire he'd built on prejudice and cruelty would crumble note by note. Underscore 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 dawn filtered through the blinds of Isabella's modest Brooklyn apartment as she prepared her morning coffee. Her fingers moved with unconscious precision, habits ingrained from decades of disciplined practice. In the corner stood an old upright piano, its keys worn smooth by countless hours of passionate performance. She caught her reflection in the window, noting the small scar on her left hand from the accident that ended her touring career. The memory surfaced briefly: twisted metal, shattered glass, and surgeons explaining why her technique would never be quite the same. Hidden beneath her bed lay her collection of Grammy Awards, gathering dust in their felt cases. The invitation to Carnegie Metropolitan's fundraising gala had arrived weeks ago. She'd registered under her mother's maiden name, Reyes, instead of the famous Isabella Montanez that once graced concert hall marquees worldwide. Some anonymity was worth preserving. Isabella dressed carefully in a simple black dress, avoiding anything that might draw attention. The subway ride to Manhattan felt surreal. How many times had she taken limousines to these same venues? Now she was just another face in the crowd, and that suited her perfectly. Carnegie Metropolitan's main hall buzzed with activity. Wealthy patrons in designer gowns mingled with conservatory faculty while student musicians tuned their instruments on stage. Isabella found a seat in the back, content to observe from the shadows. Maestro Victor Steinberg commanded the room's attention effortlessly. His silver hair gleamed under the stage lights as he addressed the crowd with practiced charm. But Isabella noticed subtler details: the way his smile never reached his eyes when speaking to the few minority students present, how he interrupted a young black cellist trying to share her scholarship story. Then his gaze found her. She watched recognition flicker across his features, not of who she was, but what she represented to him. A Hispanic woman in casual clothes, clearly out of place among his elite crowd. An opportunity to make a point. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steinberg announced, his voice carrying false warmth. "Music should be accessible to everyone, shouldn't it?" His eyes locked on Isabella. Perhaps our guest in the back row would honor us with a demonstration of amateur enthusiasm? Whispers rippled through the audience. Isabella felt her chest tighten, but she remained seated. Steinberg pressed forward, his tone growing sharper. "Come now, don't be shy. Music is for everyone, after all." The crowd's attention focused on her like a spotlight. Isabella rose slowly, her movements betraying none of the anger building inside her. She walked toward the stage with measured steps, remembering countless entrances before sold-out audiences. "Wonderful!" Steinberg exclaimed, gesturing grandly toward the concert grand piano. "Please, show us what you can do." Isabella approached the instrument, her hands hovering over the keys. The familiar weight of expectation settled over her, but this time, it wasn't anticipation. It was something far more dangerous. She began with Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her fingers finding the melody with effortless grace. The opening notes floated through the hall like whispered secrets. Conversations died. Glasses stopped clinking. Even the student musicians on stage turned to listen. But Isabella was just getting started. She transitioned seamlessly into Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2, her technique exploding into pyrotechnics that should have been impossible on a piano that hadn't been properly tuned in months. Her fingers flew across the keys with supernatural precision, executing passages that most conservatory graduates couldn't attempt. The audience sat transfixed. Several music professors leaned forward in their seats, their expressions shifting from curiosity to amazement to something approaching awe. In the back row, a young journalist fumbled for her phone, frantically trying to record. Isabella's performance reached its crescendo with her own arrangement of Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto, a piece so technically demanding that only a handful of pianists worldwide could perform it properly. She played it from memory, her scarred hand moving with impossible fluency, every note crystal clear despite the instrument's limitations. When the final chord faded into silence, the hall erupted. The standing ovation was immediate and thunderous, lasting nearly 5 minutes. But Isabella's eyes never left Steinberg's face, watching as his arrogant smile crumbled into confusion, then recognition, then something approaching terror. "My God," whispered Professor Martinez from the conservatory faculty. That's Isabella Montanez." The name rippled through the crowd like wildfire. Phone cameras emerged, capturing the moment when the world's most famous missing pianist revealed herself. Steinberg stood frozen on stage, his face draining of color as the implications crashed over him. Isabella stood gracefully, inclining her head to acknowledge the applause. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried clearly through the hall's perfect acoustics. "Music belongs to everyone who truly loves it," she said, her eyes meeting Steinberg's. "Talent doesn't ask permission from prejudice." She walked off stage with the same measured dignity she'd shown walking on, leaving behind an auditorium full of people who would never forget what they'd witnessed. Behind her, Steinberg remained paralyzed, watching his reputation dissolve in real time. Underscore 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 underscore. The video went viral within hours. Hashtag Isabella Returns trended globally as news outlets scrambled to cover the story. But for every celebration of her triumphant comeback, there was speculation about why she disappeared in the first place. Maestro Steinberg, meanwhile, retreated to his office at the conservatory, frantically making phone calls to damage control specialists and media contacts. But none of them were answering. The classical music world was small, and word traveled fast. Within 48 hours, former students began coming forward with their own stories of discrimination under Steinberg's leadership. Hispanic musicians spoke of being told they lacked European sensibility. Asian students described being pigeonholed into stereotypical repertoire choices. Black performers shared experiences of having their scholarship applications mysteriously delayed or denied. Isabella watched the news unfold from her apartment, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. She'd never intended to become a symbol of anything, she'd simply wanted to be left alone to heal. But sometimes the world doesn't give you that choice. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, comeback offers, and recording contracts. She ignored most of them, but one call stood out, from Maria Santos, the young cellist Steinberg had interrupted at the gala. "Ms. Montanez," Maria's voice was nervous but determined. "I wanted to thank you. What you did, it gave all of us permission to speak our truth." Isabella closed her eyes, remembering her own early days as a student, the teachers who believed in her and those who dismissed her as just another pretty face from Puerto Rico. "Keep playing, Maria," she said simply. "Let your music speak for itself. That's all any of us can do." underscore 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 underscore. The investigation into Steinberg's conduct moved swiftly. The conservatory's board, faced with mounting evidence and public pressure, acted decisively. Financial audits revealed irregularities in scholarship distributions. Student evaluations showed patterns of bias that could no longer be ignored. 2 weeks after the gala, Steinberg found himself facing a disciplinary hearing. The boardroom was packed with reporters, former students, and faculty members. Isabella sat in the back row, the same position she'd occupied at the fateful concert. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of discriminatory practices, buried talent evaluations, and systematic exclusion of minority students from premier opportunities. Steinberg's carefully constructed image as a champion of classical music crumbled under the weight of documented prejudice when the board announced their decision: immediate termination and a recommendation that he be banned from teaching positions at accredited institutions. Steinberg's composure finally broke. He stood shakily, looking around the room at faces that had once shown him deference and now regarded him with disgust. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was protecting the integrity of the art form." "No," Isabella said, rising from her seat. Her voice was steady, carrying the authority of someone who had conquered the world's greatest concert halls. "You were protecting your own insecurity." The room fell silent as she continued. "Great music transcends the prejudices of small minds. It always has. It always will." Steinberg left the building under a barrage of camera flashes, his career in ruins. He would spend his remaining years teaching private lessons to a dwindling client base, watching as the institutions he once controlled flourished under new, more inclusive leadership. Underscore 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 underscore. 3 months later, Isabella stood on the stage of Carnegie Hall, not Carnegie Metropolitan, but the legendary venue where she'd first made her international debut 15 years earlier. The sold-out crowd was different from those earlier triumphs, more diverse, more electric with anticipation. The concert was billed as a comeback, but Isabella knew better. It wasn't about returning to who she'd been, it was about embracing who she was becoming. Her repertoire included pieces by composers from every continent, performed with a technical mastery that proved her accident had been a setback, not an ending. In the front row sat a dozen scholarship recipients from various conservatories, students who might never have received those opportunities under the old system. Their faces glowed with inspiration as they watched someone who looked like them command the stage with absolute authority. During the intermission, Isabella was approached by a young girl with bright eyes and careful curls. "Ms. Montanez," the child said shyly. "My mama says you used to be famous, but now you're, what's the word, important?" Isabella knelt to the girl's level, studying her earnest expression. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Carmen. I play piano too, but not like you. Will you teach me someday?" Isabella smiled, remembering her own childhood dreams and the teachers who'd nurtured them despite the obstacles. "The community music program starts next month, Carmen. Ask your mama to sign you up, and tell her Isabella said you have potential." As the girl skipped away, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that extended beyond her own performances. She was no longer just a pianist who happened to be Latina. She was a bridge between the classical music world's exclusive past and its inclusive future. The second half of her concert was dedicated to young composers from underrepresented communities, their works receiving world premieres before an audience that might never have heard them otherwise. Each piece was a declaration, Classical music belonged to everyone who loved it enough to master it. When the final notes faded and the audience rose in thunderous appreciation, Isabella saw faces that reflected every corner of humanity's diversity. In that moment, she understood that her greatest victory wasn't over Steinberg's Prejudice, it was the proof that excellence transcends every boundary that small minds try to construct. The music would continue, carried forward by hands of every color, shaped by minds from every background, united only by the universal language of beauty and truth. And that was worth more than any individual triumph.